Hey everyone, it's the host of All Across America, Marco Vig, jumping in for a few seconds before the show to thank y'all for listening, to let you know that I want to hear from you. Tell me what you like about the show, and send me your suggestions too. Follow us on Instagram at AllXAmerica, or visit the website, allacrossamerica.net, and you can use our contact page there. If you want to support us, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/allacrossamerica. Try to respond personally to everyone who reaches out, so say hello. All right, on with the show. Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America. Well, thank you for joining, and maybe you could tell us how you got started on the adventure. I was reading a little bit in the About section, and you had wrote how your mom had passed away when you were much younger, about the age of my son Leo now. But then your father had passed away some years later, and maybe you could talk about the impetus of that. And it's been, 7.5 years now since you've left?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to say that. When I came up with the idea, I was actually fighting forest fires in British Columbia, the west side of Canada. So really great work, actually, walking through the forest, searching out for little smokes and cutting down dangerous trees.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, but it was also not really fulfilling, I'd say, my purpose in life. I just didn't really feel that rewarding. And working for the government can be really tiring at times. Right. They're just filled with so much inefficiencies, and they just waste so much energy and all that. And so I was starting to think like what I can do to really live my fullest life. And I had been inspired by the environmental and social justice movements.
Okay.
A few books I had read had actually really inspired me. And I had always sort of been passively active in changing my ways to be more sustainable on the planet, but never really too vocal or outgoing, and never made it my job.
Yeah.
And so it's around this time when I was thinking of this, that my dad called me up and told me that he had cancer, a rare form of acute myeloid leukemia.
Oh, wow.
And that if he didn't do some chemo, and intense chemo, that they gave him a few weeks to live.
Oh my God.
So that was out of nowhere. And so I flew home from the firefighting job. It was only a seasonal job anyways, but I left the season a bit early to go home to be with him. And on the flight home, I was okay, so what would I be doing? What would I want to be doing if I found out that I only had a few weeks to live?
Yeah.
What would be my dream job? What would be my what would be a thing I could be doing that I would have no regrets in my life, basically, and that's how Roots of Change was born.
Okay.
I was born from that, sitting on a plane, ironically. I went home to be with my dad. He didn't die in a few weeks, but he did pass away about 6 months later.
Okay.
And I started working towards making this trip happen. I went back to documentary film production school.
Okay.
Just like an intensive 1-year course.
Wow.
And I sort of workshopped what you could say was like a trailer of what this journey was going to be in that. I made a short film about stand-up paddleboarding across the Georgia Strait from Vancouver to Vancouver Island.
Okay.
And I was raising awareness about the sewage, an organization that does a lot of work with the need to clean up those waters.
Right.
I called it Straight Up Dirty.
Okay.
And because I was stand-up paddleboarding, and it was in dirty sewage treatment water. It's still an issue there, still a big issue.
What's that stretch? What's the land? What's the distance between Vancouver and Vancouver Island?
It was about 35 miles.
35 miles. Okay. Were you able to do that in a day, or?
Yeah. So it was a long day. It was 10 hours.
Okay. Yeah, it's doable. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just have to time with the winds, really, because stand-up paddleboarding into the wind just doesn't work so well at all.
Right. Right.
But if you have the wind, your body acts like a bit of a sail, and it's really not that bad. I mean, when I decided I was going to do it, I had never stand up paddleboarded in my life. So
really,
I just thankfully convinced a local shop to lend me a board and just trained for a few months, and then one did it.
wow.
Yeah, so that worked out well. And then I went back to fight fires for another couple seasons, actually. And in that time, I started researching how I was going to start this greater trip. And originally, when I planned the trip, I was going to do it strictly human powered.
Okay.
Which means you can't sail.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because that's cheating. That's using the wind. It's not human power. I mean, even a bike
though would be cheating because you're using gears, I mean, no
matter what you're doing, the wind is always going to push you in some way.
And that's true.
But, in the record books, and guys have contacted me, it's like, so you have to row if you want to row across an ocean or kayak or something. But of course, you don't row against the trade winds, because the rowboat can't go anywhere in the ocean without some wind blowing it, really. But through that, I did contact some ocean rowers and reached out to them, asked them if they would rent me their boat or sell me their boat. And I didn't have any money or sponsors at that time, but they were like, no, but stay in touch. We may need your help. And then eventually they got back to me, invited me to row around Vancouver Island, which was sort of a warm-up row, even though it was still 2,000 miles or something like that. It was a warm-up row for a bigger trip that they had planned to go across the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of those expeditions.
Yeah. So I was stoked. I'd also never rowed in my life, but here I was being invited to row around Vancouver Island with these guys, an Olympic gold medalist. Another guy had already rowed from New York to England on the same boat. And so we went around the island, and I was filming, and they ended up liking me. And two of the guys backed out of that trip on the Atlantic Ocean, and so they invited me.
Okay.
And so I rowed with them, I guess, about 8 months later across the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
We started from Dakar, Senegal, and we didn't actually make it all the way across. We were aiming to go from Dakar, Senegal to Miami.
Okay.
And we would have been the first people to row from Africa to North America.
Wow.
But we made it about 3,000 miles. We were out there rowing 24/7 for 72 days.
Wow.
There was 4 of us on the boat, so 2 of us would sleep and 2 of us would row.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. So crazy. But the first few weeks were about like a rare form of torture, but eventually the body adapts, and I was enjoying myself out there in the end. But yeah, we hit just a fluky couple waves, flipped us, so we capsized.
Wow.
And it was really bad timing because we had just changed shifts and the cabin door was open.
Oh, wow.
Because just to let some air in before we started rowing, when we thought it might get a little bit more tipsy, but it got us when we weren't rowing. And so we were 400 miles north of Puerto Rico at the time.
Oh, man.
Had to get rescued, but we got rescued and all was well.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess at that point there's no contention amongst the 4 of you. It sounded like that was the only option at that point. Was there any back and forth, or was it just like, because now you're on basically a solo adventure, whereas there, you had, it was 4 folks, team. Yeah.
So, I mean, there was issues from almost the start of that trip.
Right.
I mean, we rode right through Cabo Verde Islands, and one of the guys really wanted to stop and go to the islands.
Okay.
He was, I think, realizing he just didn't want to be on the boat that bad, but I guess that would have ruined the record attempts.
Right. I mean, that's it, right? You've got to do it without really touching land,
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really care either way because I wasn't concerned with the record. I was just there for the adventure of it all. And we did have a whole other side to the trip, which was this educational and science purpose. We were partnered with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and we had all this gear monitoring the salinity and the pH and the chlorophyll content of the water. We had a pump constantly sucking in the ocean water and sending the data back to a university in the States. And then we also had like a school curriculum, so a bunch of classes could follow along and learn stuff about the ocean through us. We had a little sat dome, and yeah, it was a big money expedition. That like 2-3 month expedition was way more money than, well, not way more money, but more money than my 7.5 year expedition.
I mean, I got a rowboat on the local reservoir that I take fishing, but I've seen those ocean going rowboats, and they don't look anything like any rowboat you've ever seen.
No, they're like, they're like sailboats, just with the mast cut off and designed much more streamlined. But yeah, they're worth, our rowboat was worth, I think, 10 times more than my sailboat that I've sailed with, here from India. So
wow.
I mean, my sailboat is pretty small and cheap.
It is, and that was one of the questions I had. My brother's a sailor, and I think he's got a 20-something foot sailboat, but yours is 30 feet, right? Which is on the small side for, a blue water sailing.
Yeah, I mean, but we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves. So yeah, no, it's only 27 feet. Yeah,
27.
It was the only thing I could find when I was in India.
So you got rescued, and you did the group thing. You got the experience down. I mean, I guess after that, are you thinking to yourself, I can do this, and I could do this better by myself? Or
well, no. So that was never. I never really thought of that as part of this trip, but once I was on that row, I was like, maybe I should, if I get the Atlantic out of the way, maybe I should just start my trip the second we get to land and just continue without a motor.
Oh, wow.
And so I was contemplating that, almost starting to plan it with the other guy, because one of the guys on the boat was also keen to row more.
Oh, wow.
He was willing to row across the Pacific with me.
Wow.
So then the whole human powered thing would have worked. But when we capsized, that whole plan fell apart.
Right.
And and I mean, that boat hasn't been rowed since, unfortunately. It took a bit of damage. Actually, more when we went to rescue it and putting it on the tugboat, but because we did recover it. But yeah, I had never really planned to make my Roots of Change trip a group journey, sort of. And I always knew I could do it. I just didn't know how, to get started with no big sponsorship or support money. And, I had thought originally the funding would come through a film budget, which is part of the reason why I studied filmmaking.
Okay.
So always like the vision of the trip from when I came up with it has changed a little bit since.
Well, 7.5 years. I mean, you hope something evolves, It's,
Well, so I never really thought about this, like the whole inspiring aspect of what I'm doing and how I would be this inspiration for people. I always wanted to use the adventure that I'm on to raise support for other local nonprofits, environmental, social justice organizations that I meet along the way. Yeah. And use the filmmaking to sort of help them out with publicity and media.
That's great.
Raise some support, financial or otherwise, just to get their stories out there.
Right.
And, but pitching that idea to producers and broadcasters was not working. And partly because it's such a long trip with so much risk.
Yeah.
And people think of a 7-year project and they think a lot of money, and, they just can't see how it's going to happen. And I didn't really know what the story was going to be either. I mean, it's an adventure. There's like so much could happen.
Right. There isn't that hook just yet, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it would, it's going to be an adventure. It's going to be good, like whatever it is. But eventually, I got back from that row, and I started actually working on trying to get funding for a film about that ocean row.
Okay.
And the first sort of year, I didn't really have any success with that either. Although, and then I was like, do I really want to spend my next year or two working on this film, or do I want to just do what I want to do, you know? And I could see the Roots of Change thing sort of slowly slipping away if I just delayed it more and more.
Yeah. Yep.
And I wasn't getting younger, and you know, I was 32 at this time, and I was like, you know, I gotta go for it. I just gotta.
No better time than the present.
Yeah, I just gotta make it work. I just gotta go for it, and I'll start. If I have to stop along the way and flip burgers to make it work, then I'll do that. But I think I just gotta go, and so I made that decision to like go full on in February of 2015, and I gave myself a like firm date of July.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm just going. I started organizing, and I started. I started in Toronto, walking with a big community of mine.
Right.
And hopped in a canoe with a buddy of mine, and we just started paddling.
All right. Well, maybe you can kind of give us it's 7.5 years. So maybe you can kind of give us the brief run of where you've been in the world. And you started paddling. I know you did some ski touring across British Columbia.
Yeah. I can go through it all. I've got it all in the brain pretty clearly. So yeah, I started, like I said, I actually started crawling from
I saw that.
So I was in front of the house that I was born in. I was the house that I was born in.
Wow.
Fortunately, my family doesn't have that house anymore, but I started there symbolically.
Yeah, it's a metaphor that works on multiple ways, you know, crawling where you were born and then the beginning of a journey. You know?
Yeah. And then I just walked down the street, and I had gotten like a bunch of my community from Toronto to join me, and we walked on the boardwalk back and forth. And then my buddy Rain joined me, and we got in a canoe, and we canoed through Lake Ontario and then up the canal system.
Okay.
Into the other lakes, so Georgian Bay and Lake Huron. And then I got to close to Lake Superior, and somebody said, "Hey, you can't go in a canoe by yourself." At this point, I was by myself in the canoe. I had 3 different friends join me in the canoe trip. It was about over the course of 600 miles or so.
Okay.
And then some guy saw me canoeing solo and could see me going to Lake Superior, and he's like, "No, man, you're going to kill yourself. You're crazy." And so he gave me this Adventure Island Hobie trimaran to sail and paddle through Lake Superior, because Lake Superior is known to be a very dangerous lake.
Really? The winds pick up?
Yeah, the winds and the waves pick up really wild there, and it's a very deep lake and cold.
Okay.
And so lots of ships have sunk on that lake.
Wow. Okay.
In the end, I probably could have done it fine in the canoe, because just my timing was good, and I ended up having some really calm weather, which was not great for the Hobie trimaran. Because when there's no wind, you have to either kayak it, but it doesn't do that really well because it's got the outriggers, or pedal it. It has this like pedal system, which ended up starting a bit of a knee problem that I'd never had in my life. So that was a pain in the butt.
Yeah. But
it was still fun. And I did have a couple days of pretty crazy weather, which would have been dicey in a canoe. And then, a friend met me with a different canoe. We canoed the last little bit of Lake Superior along the shoreline. And then I had met a guy who was a paraplegic, and he lent me his hand cycle. So I hand cycled 1,600 kilometers. Is it okay if I say kilometers?
Yes. I will try to translate for some folks. I guess that would be about, I don't know, 12.
I mean, I can wing it in miles. Usually when I'm on land, I'm thinking in kilometers. And then when I'm on the sea, I'm thinking in nautical miles. Which is
nautical miles, 1.15 regular miles.
Yeah. I'll try and stick to miles. So it was about 1,000 miles in the hand cycle.
Right.
And I went from Thunder Bay to Winnipeg. And then this is the one sponsor I had before I started the trip was a pogo stick company.
I saw that you did a few miles on a pogo stick.
Yeah, I did. So they sent me a bunch of pogo sticks to Winnipeg, and I pogo sticked 6 miles through the city.
Okay.
It took me about 5 hours.
Wow.
The one thing that I said I was going to do on this trip that I wasn't confident that I would be able to actually do it.
Right.
But the movement of the hand cycle jumping forward is actually very similar, or movement of the hand cycle very similar to the jumping on the pogo stick. So it's not much legs, the spring is that, but to move it forward, it's all shoulders and arms.
Right. Okay.
So it's a weird thing, but yeah, that was fun. One of the funnest things. Quite hard, but I managed to
check it off. Check it off the bucket list.
Yeah. And then a guy there in Winnipeg lent me a recumbent tricycle. So I tricycled about another. That was a long one though. That was, I think, about 1,200 miles across the prairies.
And when you say recumbent tricycle, those are the very low riding bicycles that you might see on the side of the road. It's generally for folks that have back problems, right? That use those, and they're just a few feet off the ground, and they're kind of almost laying back while they're using it, right?
Yeah, I don't know that people use them because of back problems. I've never heard that before, but yeah, that could be, I guess, maybe a thing. I don't know that it would be better for your back necessarily, though.
So then,
what's on your issue? But
why do people use them then? What's the difference between that and a regular bike? I guess is the question.
Well, there's some big differences. I don't know why people choose them, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's a comfort thing. Some people just prefer that position.
Right. Okay.
I did not, at least not the recumbent that I was on.
Okay.
They do make some very streamlined, they call them velomobiles. Ones where you're recumbent, but you're fully enclosed, and it looks like a bullet almost.
Oh.
And those things make sense. Those should really be the cycle of the future for people who want to do what I'm doing, because you can easily go 50 miles an hour on them
because of the aerodynamics and
just the aerodynamics, and you're in a little closed car almost, and you can cover distance fast in one of those, but those cost $12,000. And the guy who lent me his recumbent tricycle had one of those. And I was like, "Oh, do you want to lend me that?" He's like, "No." So he lent me his crappy little thing, which it was great of him, but it was not comfortable on the knees.
Yeah.
And it was starting to get cold in Canada. So I was doing that in October. I had some snow days. And I got to the Rockies, snow started falling, and so then I switched to skis.
Okay.
And thankfully, I got a bunch of this sponsored by MEC in Canada, which is like the REI in Canada.
Mountain Equipment Co-op, of course.
Yeah,
yes. A lot of people in the States don't know it, but it's the REI equivalent.
Yeah.
The backpack in Europe, you could always pick out a Canadian if they had Mountain Equipment Co-op gear.
Yeah.
It's great store, great organization, I guess you'd call it.
Unfortunately, though, they sold out recently.
They did. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know the whole deal, but I don't know that. I don't think it's a cooperative anymore. I'm pretty sure they got bought out, which is weird. I don't know how that whole worked out.
Yeah.
But anyways, they were great, and they hooked me up with some skis, and so I skied across the Rockies and all the mountain chains in British Columbia to Vancouver.
Wow.
And that was about a 500-mile ski.
Okay.
And I was doing that very lightweight, so just 30-liter backpack on my back, a bivy sack, shovel. So I dig out under trees and make a little camp at night.
How are you in the cold? Sounds like pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I have it in my blood a little bit, but after that trip, I was like, I'm not traveling in the snow again.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
I have forgotten that though, because now I want the snow. I want to travel in the snow. It's like skiing sounds really good. After being on the roads for so long, I would choose skiing through the snow any day.
Yeah.
I mean, being on roads and inhaling exhaust on a bike, it's just so sketchy. So many drives. I'm so much more peaceful in the snow, and I would be willing to suffer in the cold a little bit.
Fair enough.
It's tough, but yeah, depending where you are, you can stop at places along the way. I probably had a warm spot every 3 to 4 days on that trip.
That's fair. So,
yeah. It's not that uninhabited there. I was in the southern portion of British Columbia.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And I got off the skis, and the next morning we had organized it with this crew of people. I met them down on the Fraser River, and they had like 3 canoes and 2 stand-up paddleboards, I think. And I just paddled down the river for 3 days into Vancouver.
Okay.
And then another friend joined me, and we tandem kayaked from Vancouver to Vancouver Island.
Nice.
And then I got on my bicycle, met some other friends, and we stand-up paddleboarded down a river. And then my sister joined me with a canoe, and we canoed the last little bit to Tofino, which has been my home base since, I don't know, forever.
Okay.
I grew up in Toronto, but I live out on the West Coast in Tofino. It's beautiful.
And where is that in relation to Vancouver?
So it's on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So it's it's a really big island. And we're sort of halfway up the coast on the west side. There's no roads really on the west coast, so it's quite remote.
Right.
We're at the end of a road. And I mean, if you were to take a car and the ferry, it would take you about 6 hours to get there from Vancouver.
Wow. Okay. I've been to Vancouver. I dated a girl years ago from Vancouver Island. Heard nothing but good things about it. So one of these days.
There's I've been a lot of places all over the world, and there's nowhere I would rather live.
Really? Wow.
I'll be heading back there. Yeah. And then eventually I bicycled down the island and got in a rowboat with another friend, just a smaller sort of open rowboat, and we rowed from the island to Washington State. Into the state. That was just I don't know, maybe 5-hour row, 4 or 5 hour row. And then I got on my bicycle and bicycled down to San Francisco, and met a friend of a friend who I had been introduced to 2 weeks into the trip. Actually, when I started the trip, I didn't know how I was going to get across the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
And, to my luck, 2 weeks into the trip, a friend of a friend called me up. It's like, hey, I'm looking to sail to Hawaii. Do you want to?
That's great. Wow.
And I was like, well, sure. But, you have to sort of accommodate me in my no motor thing. Like, you can't motor the boat when I'm on it.
Right.
And he was cool with that. So that was great. And we sailed. There was a 25-day sail to Hawaii.
Yep.
When we left San Francisco, he wanted to leave when there was very little wind. So I actually stand-up paddleboarded out of San Francisco under the Golden Gate Bridge. And eventually the wind picked up on the other side of the bridge, and I got on the boat. And and then we sailed.
He used the motor from San Francisco Harbor. You met him under the Golden Gate Bridge. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And same when we arrived in Hawaii, he was fairly new to sailing. Also, it's part of the reason why he wanted my help.
Right.
But it is quite nerve-wracking sailing in and out of places like harbors where there's all these boats around. So
I watched your video, not only boats, but particularly in the South Pacific. I mean, you will have her traveling to 3 places that I really love in the world. One is the South Pacific, second is Myanmar, and the third, of course, is the Appalachian Trail. But I know in the South Pacific, in that some of these passages, and you showed in one of your videos I think it was the Hawaii to Micronesia video. Some of these passages through these, you've got sharp coral on either side of you, and you've got 25 feet of passage, and without a motor, people don't realize how difficult that is.
Yeah, it's always the scariest part is leaving and arriving.
Right.
100%. So yeah, when we got to Hawaii, I paddled in as well. He used the motor. I mean, he was able to sail most of the way, but he wanted to have the motor ready, and so I was happy to paddle anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got to Hawaii, and he actually marooned me, which another word for ditching. Yeah. So he decided he wanted to sail solo from there, which I have a feeling he always sort of wanted to do. He just didn't tell me that.
I see. It sounds like, without knowing much about it, he didn't have the confidence to go from San Francisco to Hawaii on his own, and it was a symbiotic thing for that leg, and worked for the both of you. And sounds like he got his sea legs and said sayonara.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, I mean, I probably would have gone with him, even knowing that he was going to leave me in Hawaii, even though we had talked about going all the way to Asia. I probably still would have taken the ride to Hawaii, but it was, when I was stuck in Hawaii, it was proven very hard to find anybody going further on,
right?
Or any boats for that matter. I mean, I didn't have any budget really. I was starting to think about building like a little outrigger sailing canoe type of thing. And sailing. I had to figure out a way to continue on, and thankfully, well, unfortunately for him, but thankfully for me, he had a pretty rough sail when he went south, and decided to return to Hawaii and lend me his boat.
Wow.
So we made a little like rental agreement, and I sailed his boat solo out of Hawaii to the Marshall Islands, and that was a 20-day sail.
Right.
And then from Marshall Islands through Micronesia, to Palau, Philippines, Hong Kong.
Right.
And I got off the boat, gave him the boat back in Hong Kong.
Wow. And you had a pretty concerning injury. You had an infection on your leg. Have you had any other incidents like that? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was really unfortunate timing. So you mentioned the South Pacific. It actually is not the South Pacific. I was still in the North Pacific.
Okay. Yes, through Micronesia.
So, Marshall Islands and Micronesia. Right when I left the Marshall Islands, I scratched my knee on the boat, little cut, and it turned into a gnarly infection that was just like eating my flesh.
How does that? I mean, the salt water, your diet, like what?
So I put it down to a few different things. I think it was partly because while I was in the Marshall Islands, I actually also I didn't break. I might have fractured my heel playing basketball.
Right.
Which was also really bad timing because I surf, and I was really looking forward to surfing the Marshall Islands and Micronesia. That foot injury took me off of that for a little bit. And then while I was healing, I was staying at this, friendly guy let me stay in a room of his, but there was halfway through my stay there, I discovered that there was just a ton of mold underneath the bed.
Oh.
And so I think the mold had an effect on my immune system.
Interesting.
That's what I suspect. And then when I got this cut, some weird bacteria entered my body, and my body's immune system was just a bit weakened, I guess, and was not effective at fighting it. I also think a big part of the issue was the fact that in Koshrai, where I sailed from Marshall Islands, it was just about a 5-day sail. When I got there, I had a massive hole in my knee and was pretty concerned. And I went to the hospital, and they gave me some antibiotics.
Right.
And I did the whole course of the antibiotics, and it looked to maybe be getting better, but it didn't. In the end.
Yeah.
And so I think the antibiotics further weakened my immune system, and the bacteria got even more of a hold in my body. And I left Koshrai sailing through Micronesia and arrived at this tiny little atoll, and my butt was sore. I had the wounds had spread to my butt and another part on my other knee and my thigh. My whole leg started going red. I felt like I might have to amputate my leg.
God.
It was getting scary. And I went to the local, I don't know, they called him like a witch doctor. He gave me some concoctions, and I don't know, they didn't really seem to be helping.
Okay.
I gave them a chance, but I was like, okay, maybe this will help.
What was the population of the island you were on? Any sense?
Maybe 250.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when I left there, I had an option to the nearest hospital was about a 400-mile sail upwind.
Okay.
Or 800-mile like downwind, which is the way that I wanted to go in order to meet a girl who was coming to visit me.
Okay. It's an incentive.
So in the end, I made the call. I was like, it's a longer, almost 2-week sail, but I made the call to do that.
Okay.
Which and as I was sailing, I was worried about the leg and stuff, but I made a concoction of all the herbs in my kitchen, garlic and thyme and oregano and ginger and everything, all this different stuff, and I was drinking it, but also pouring it on the wound, and that actually seemed to help.
Wow. Okay. Wound salve, cooking spices, do double duty.
Yeah.
Spice up
medicinal too.
Wow. Okay. And so you went to a hospital. Where were you there? Where was 800 miles downwind?
Palau.
Okay. All right.
Palau. So yeah, I got to Palau. I had a wound in my head right before I got there, and that was pretty scary.
Oh goodness.
But stuff sort of started getting better there. I took more antibiotics in Palau, which didn't completely heal the issue, but I was still functioning and fine. And
right.
The girl met me, and we had beautiful sails around Palau, and she was actually going to sail with me to the Philippines, but a big low system came through and sort of delayed the plans, and she had to fly home. And then I offered Dave, the owner of the boat, to come and join me for the sail. So he sailed with me from Palau to the Philippines.
Oh, great. Okay.
Where I then met another friend of mine who we were just planning on surfing for a little bit, but I got there late because of this storm system. Unfortunately, he was only there for 10 days. I got there like 5 days into his stay. So it was a bit of a bummer, but
right.
It was good timing for when my sister showed up, which was like 5 days after. And my sister sailed with me for about a month and a half through the Philippines.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Dave, the owner, came back and sailed with me for the final little leg to Hong Kong.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I mean, so when you're doing it without motors, but let's say you're spending a few days in Hong Kong, is it only forward momentum, no motors, or let's say you're going out to dinner, I don't know, and you all grab a cab together? Is that permissible?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I have not been in a car. I have not been in an elevator. I have not been on an escalator in 7.5 years. So I take it seriously. Yeah.
Wow, that's for real.
Yeah.
For real. Yeah. Wow, that's purist right there. I like it. I respect it. I mean, the first time you get into a car, it's going to be like being on a rocket ship. I mean, I can only think, hiking for 2 weeks and getting, hitching a ride into town, and they're going 40 miles an hour and thinking that you're in a race car. So, man, wow.
Yeah.
So how has that been for some of your companions? Did they grow a little tired of it, or I guess that's kind of written into the
it's not really like, I don't think that anybody grows tired of it. They forget all the time. People always forget, even even now to this day. Like I still am with people who know what I'm doing, but they forget. They're like, oh yeah, right, you gotta have to take a bike. But it's not really an inconvenience for them in any way. I mean, I just don't travel with them. I usually get to places at the same time. So I'm often ahead of them because they get stuck in traffic or, this and that. It's easier for me to just hop on my bike. I mean, people look at cars as a form of freedom or something, but I find myself, I've come to realize this quite a bit more recently, that I'm just way more independent, always having my own transportation.
Yeah.
I don't have to rely on getting an Uber or getting a cab or waiting for transportation, waiting for a bus, this or that. I can just hop on my bike and go and park it wherever. And it's
Particularly if you're in a city like Hong Kong, it's probably a lot easier getting around by bike often.
Well, Hong Kong was actually a bit of an issue because they don't allow bikes in the tunnels.
Okay.
And so Hong Kong, like half of the city is on an island.
Right.
And I had to figure out a stand-up paddleboard to paddle back and forth across.
Oh, wow.
To get over there, which, it's a pretty busy harbor there. And I think officially they would say no. So I just never asked. I just did it.
Yeah. That's for forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah. And thankfully I avoided them. I was timed it really well when there was no boats out there, and I just went as fast as I could. It wasn't a super long paddle by any means, but I had to do it a few times and it worked out well. But yeah, the cities, generally it's much faster to get around in a city on a bike.
Yeah.
As long as they don't have challenges like that.
So let me
it's more the going up in cities that's the challenge.
Right. Let me ask you this before I forget, and I keep coming back to, all right, so you have this pogo stick, and then you've got the canoe, and you got the sailboat, and you got the bike. Where do you do with the transitions? Like, how do you, if you know you're not going to be on a bike for a while, like, how do you get rid of the bike knowing you may need it again 1,000 miles later?
Well, I really do wish that I had, that Dave had let me bring my bicycle on the boat.
Okay.
But he did not think there was space for it. So that began a series of way too many bikes that were not good for me.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, they're going across Canada. All those sort of things, except for the pogo stick, which I planned ahead, all those other things just came about while I was on the trip, and people just like, here, take this, borrow this, and
nice.
And in terms of transitioning, it went really quite smooth and quite fast. My backup plan was always to get a bicycle sent to me, but I never had to do that in Canada.
That's great. Yeah.
I'd borrow something and then throw it on a bus back to wherever I took it from.
Right.
Or something like that, depending on what it was. Sometimes I'd give it away, donate it, this or that.
Oh, wow. All right.
But yeah, the second I got to Hawaii, I had to go out and buy a mountain bike, which, and then when I got to Hong Kong, somebody gave me a road bike, which was decent, but a bit small for me, not like perfect.
Yeah.
And that eventually sunk in the Mekong River.
Okay. And the Mekong River is where you were robbed that night. Is that correct?
Oh, well, that's actually a funny. It's that same bike. So yeah, so I had bicycled from China through Vietnam into Laos, and wanted to get off the bicycle basically and paddle down the Mekong River. And so me and this random German traveler guy I met decided we'd buy a little canoe, flat water canoe that they use for fishing and stuff. And so we started paddling down the Mekong from northern Laos. And one night we stopped in a town, and some people invited us to stay at their place. So we took them up on the offer. It happened quite a bit. It was an amazing trip down the river, by the way. And I left the bike sort of disassembled in the boat.
Okay.
Thinking it would be okay, small town, nothing's going to happen. And when we went back in the morning, the bike was gone.
Oh, wow.
And I went and told some people in town, and they're like, okay, well, here, let's exchange WhatsApps just in case we find it or whatever. And we continued paddling down the river. I wasn't that attached to the bike anyway, because like I said, it was a smaller road bike, which is not great for touring. It's like a really aggressive stance.
Okay.
So, yeah, it wasn't a big deal to me. Like whatever, I let it go pretty fast. But we paddled another 3 days down the river and got to Luang Prabang in Laos. And I think after a day or two that I was there, I got a phone call from this guy. It's like, hey, we found your bike.
Really?
We're going to send it down on the next boat.
Cool.
And so apparently the bike, I think some kids had just played with the boat or something, and the bike was just like in the river, right where the boat was parked. That's just the way the story goes, but got the bike back in one piece.
Really? Wow.
And yeah, and then we continued on paddling down the river. And funny enough, this bike was just not meant to stay with me. There was a dam being built in the river, so we had to detour off the river onto a small little side river. And I had to bike to my friend took the boat on a truck or something to the top of the river, and I had to get back on my bike and bike to this river.
Okay.
We got to the river and we didn't have too much information on it. Maybe there's some small rapids or whatever.
Right.
And sure enough, there was some rapids where we had to like rope the boat down. It's a pretty big, maybe 30-foot long wooden flat bottom boat.
Oh wow, that's a big boat. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's 30 feet. I don't know if it's quite 30 feet. It's not that big. Like, it's very low to the water.
Right.
But yeah, it was long. And we came down this one set of rapids that we ran them successfuli. Not crazy rapids.
Right.
Just little bumps here and there, class 1 or something.
Okay.
And and then there was a bend in the river and like a rock wall, and we tried to paddle around the bend, but we just got pushed up against the rock wall. Okay. And the force of the water instantly the boat just sunk beneath us.
Oh.
And all of our stuff, everything gone. We're just sitting there floating with our paddles in our hands, and we're like, oh, where'd the boat go? And I don't know, it felt like a long time, but probably about 10 seconds later, the boat came back up, but it was upside down.
Oh.
And some of our bags and stuff were in garbage bags tied to the boat. So we managed to save a bunch of that stuff, but the bicycle had come loose and never saw it again.
Yeah. So
I lost the bike in the end, which again, no big deal. We continued on down the river. I think it was in the end 3 to 4 weeks we were on the river.
Oh, wow.
We made it past Vientiane, the capital. We were going to go all the way down into Cambodia, and plan was actually to paddle over to Angkor Wat. But a few days past Vientiane, we ran into some immigration officials. At that point, the river is the border between Thailand and Laos, which it is for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And they pulled us over and they're like, you can't paddle on this river. Sorry,
really?
It's the law. Foreigners are not allowed to paddle on the river.
Really?
Which I was pretty sure there was no law saying foreigners are not allowed to paddle on the river, but
what are you going to do? Argue?
Yeah, they weren't letting us continue, and I think it comes that sentiment comes from not far from the Mekong, on some smaller rivers. There's a town that's become sort of a backpacker haven. It's also known for a lot of drugs, and a lot of people do tubing on the rivers there, and a lot of people die while tubing on the rivers there because
finding water sports and drugs is usually not.
Yeah, so I think that's made it a sort of a bad rap for foreigners not knowing what to do on the rivers.
Right. Okay.
Even though we had paddled for a few weeks already and we were capable there, they weren't having it. So at that point, I didn't have a bicycle. So I had to walk. I think it was almost 100 miles back to the capital, Vientiane.
Oh, okay. So you had to backtrack.
Yeah, I had to. Well, it made the most sense, partly because my visa was going to expire. So I needed a longer visa and I needed to find a new bicycle.
Yeah. And that was only going to happen in the capital or.
Yeah, it was hard to find. I was lucky I found what I did find. It was actually a foreigner's bike.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was lucky. I found a Surly, I don't know if you know Surly bikes. They're good steel frame bikes. Especially in the touring world, a lot of people have these Surleys. They're made, I think, in the west coast of the U.S. Really nice bikes.
Yeah.
Again, it wasn't perfectly fit for me. It's just a bit small still, but it was way bigger and better than any other bike I could find in Laos.
Right.
Because I'm 6'3", and most Laotians are like maybe 5'4", 5'5".
Okay, so beggars can't be choosers, and
I was happy. I was lucky. So Yeah, and then I was on the bicycle for through Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, got down to Singapore, and I really wanted to get over to Indonesia, to Sumatra, partly to look for more boats and partly because I wanted to surf. Before I started this trip, like surfing was sort of my daily exercise, is what I did every day for 2 to 4 hours. So I was missing it quite a bit. But getting over to Sumatra was a bit of a challenge because the Malacca Strait is in the way. And eventually I found another adventurer there in Singapore who lent me a kayak. And I kayaked across the Malacca Strait, which is the busiest shipping lane on the planet.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
So I was playing Frogger with a bunch of big.
Yeah, the real life video game, dodging tankers and cargo ships. Yeah.
I mean, I was definitely scared going into it, partly because I didn't think the immigration was going to let me leave or arrive so smoothly.
Yeah.
But I managed to convince them. Leaving Malaysia, I went to the ferry terminal.
Okay.
And it was probably the second to third time that I had to pull out a letter that I have from a friend of mine who's a member of parliament in Canada.
Oh, okay.
So, he's got this official government looking letter telling them what I do and how I'm doing it, and please support me.
Wow. All right.
And so it gives a certain amount of officialdom to my craziness.
I mean, you wouldn't think in these days that would make much of a difference, halfway across the world, but I'm glad to hear that a letter still bears some sort of weight.
Yeah, it basically it takes a little bit of the responsibility off of them, because there's no law saying I can't do what I'm doing necessarily, because it's just such a bizarre thing, but they're worried that they're going to be held responsible for this foreigner dying.
All right.
And so that sort of takes the responsibility off them and puts it more on my government and myself. But it also sort of proves to them that I'm capable.
Right.
I know what I'm doing. I'm not just some lunatic or somebody doing some drug smuggling or something,
Right. So you've been both vouched for and then they absolved the culpability themselves with this one letter, so it kind of serves that dual purpose. Take travelers, get yourself your local ambassador.
I'm really glad, because a friend of mine in the town I left, he's like, oh, you should get him to write, and you should get him to write a letter too for you. And I was like, okay, that's a great idea.
And it worked. Wow. All right.
It's got me out of a few sticky situations. Like when we sailed, I couldn't leave Hong Kong overland because they force you onto a bus to leave Hong Kong to go into China.
Okay.
I almost got special permission from the police, but then the president of China was arriving and the security just went on lockdown. So we actually had to sail. Thankfully, Dave helped me out here and we sailed from Hong Kong to Macau. But Macau is crazy because before you sail there, they want you to go to Macau and apply for permission to sail there.
Oh God. Right.
And so it was just this not going to happen weird situation. And they wanted us to sail right back to Hong Kong when we arrived. Just like, come on, getting into Macau was crazy sail. That was super crazy because we had to sail up this narrow channel around boats and everything. And, but eventually I pulled out the letter and all the immigration guys started rallying to try and help me out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I've traveled a lot of places in the world and the people can be awesome, but you'll always find the same sort of government officialdom mentality when you're dealing with customs folks anywhere in the world. It feels like it's
I feel like up to this point, I definitely feel like I've been very lucky, because I always thought that some bureaucracy, some weird red tape detail law thing was going to force me to use a motor, but
right.
It's come close many times, but a lot of times I've just sort of, like you said earlier, don't ask for permission, beg for forgiveness.
Yeah. If need be.
If need be. Yeah.
Wow.
But so I got out of Malaysia fine, and then paddled across. I mean, I was scared because I'm not a particularly skilled kayaker. I didn't know how to roll my kayak. It's a 17-foot sea kayak. I knew how to climb back in, and I'm agile and comfortable in the ocean, but my rolling wasn't good. And so I was like, I feel I should know how to roll this thing better. But in the end, it was just a whole lot of nerves and stuff for what was not really that hard of a paddle. I just was smart about it. I was patient. I timed my passage between the ships well. Never came close. They never had to alter their course or anything. I stayed out of their way, and the lanes are quite distinctly, you can see them coming. So managed to get through there, and then the nerves was, will Indonesia let me in? Right. And so I just did the same thing. Went into the ferry terminal, the immigration there, and so they're used to checking in foreigners, just not on a kayak, and so
right.
It worked out. I think I had to pull out the letter again then. But then people probably didn't even read English, so it was less important. But again, it made me seem a little bit more
legit.
How
was it during the height of COVID? I mean, obviously you've been traveling for 7.5 years now. Did you have difficulty getting into new countries that were locked down?
Thankfully, no. I think I really lucked out again with the COVID situation. So yeah, after Indonesia surfing, long story short, I ended up in India for COVID. So I got locked down in Rishikesh in the north of India. And at the time I had gotten a 1-year visa for India because I could, but also because I was really looking forward to walking. I had always hoped to do more walking through Asia, but so many of the countries have these like 30-day visas that you need to get, which just sort of makes walking not possible. Right. But India was somewhere where that would have been possible, but then lockdown happened.
Right.
And I mean, I was in a pretty nice place. Rishikesh is sort of a spiritual capital up there in the north. A lot of yogis go there. A lot of people go there for their teacher training courses. There's a bunch of ashrams, and right where the Ganges flows out of the Himalayas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Pretty beautiful place, especially when there's no tourists there, or very few tourists.
Yes.
So, usually there's cars honking and stuff like that. Not that many, but, for India, it's always pretty peaceful. But during lockdown, it was next level, very peaceful.
Right.
And I met a girl like a few days before lockdown. So
perfect! Wow, you've had some good luck.
Luck comes to those who are patient.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah. So we were locked down together, and she went back home to Germany after I think 6 months of lockdown. I was there for another couple months. And managed to find this sailboat after searching for a long time. It was down in the south of India. But I had to wait for the lockdown to lift enough. They weren't allowing interstate travel. Eventually, they finally lifted that, and so I had to bike. What was it? It was about 2,500 miles through India.
Wow.
Sort of in the I guess it was 8 months into COVID. So it was in between the first and the second lockdown in India.
I see.
Which was, a very weird time to be traveling in India. I'd say in a way I had a lot more personal space than I would have otherwise.
Yeah.
And the roads were more peaceful, but they're still horrible. I think cycling through Asia just turned me off of cycle touring in a big way.
Just the traffic and pollution.
The pollution, horn honking, traffic pollution. It's just, roads are not very pleasant places to be.
Right.
In Asia, at least. And then I got this boat. It was partly because of COVID. So a young Australian kid had sailed it there from England. And he went home to Australia, left the boat, and then saw what was happening with COVID, and he wanted to get rid of the boat. And so I bought this. It's a 27-foot boat. It was built in England under the name Chopper 500, but it's the same build as a CNC 27.
Okay.
And there's probably 1,000 of them in the Great Lakes.
Okay.
The CNC 27. So it's designed for the Great Lakes. It's not designed to cross an ocean.
Right.
But it's capable. He had sort of proven that, and I have continued to prove that it's capable on the ocean. It needed a bit of work, so I spent about 4 months fixing it up. And then I sailed out of India, I think 2 weeks before their crazy second wave and next lockdown. So I got out of there just in good timing. Not great timing for the wind, though. I left a little bit later than I should have and had very little wind it was only a 1,500-mile sail to the Seychelles, but it took me 40 days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so that was my first sail on the boat. It was a 40-day sail.
Wow. Okay. That's diving into the deep end right away. Wow.
Yeah. But I had good things to look forward to when I got to the Seychelles, because the German girl that I had met during lockdown met me there.
And it's the Seychelles.
And it's the Seychelles, which are beautiful, but also very expensive. So not a great place for me on my low budget.
Well,
even if you're living on your sailboat, they charge you quite a bit.
That's another question, man. How are you supporting yourself? You had mentioned you had a couple sponsors early on. How are you supporting yourself through all of this?
Yeah, so those sponsors were strictly for some gear.
Okay.
And they were only at that time when I was in Canada, really. I've been crowdfunded.
Wow, that's great.
Basically, more accurately, I'd say community funded, because the crowd is very much just my community.
Okay.
So I have done a couple crowdfunding campaigns. The second one, I basically pre-sold the book and the film.
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
So I offered that as perks. So I'm very committed to making those two things happen.
Right. Excellent.
And yeah, so that got me to Asia. And then I was sort of getting tired of the crowdfunding and asking for support from people all the time. So I started a YouTube blog.
Okay.
And that has since sort of helped me out with the funding side of things.
Great. So, I mean, you're getting subscribers, you're getting watchers, and you're able to have advertising and get paid through that, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very small amount of advertising. I have one video that brought me in some advertising revenue, but it's, maybe enough to cover my computer.
Yeah.
But I have also expanded into like the membership based crowdfunding. So through like Patreon.
Right. I saw that. And I mean, I got to hand it to you. Not only are you traveling, but I mean, you're also filming yourself. So, I mean, you're doing double duty, and, a lot of people don't realize that there's a cameraman behind these shots. And, you've got, if you're hiking and you're seeing yourself in that pose, it's because you hiked already there, set up the camera, and then are repeating that process.
Yeah. And sometimes it's for like the 1,000th time, it gets tiring. It gets tiring.
Take 18.
Like, do I really need this shot? Is it really worth it? No, I don't. I don't take more than one shot ever. Okay. Really. I'm not that. And maybe my filmmaking suffers because of it, but I'm more of a I'll get this shot and move on. I don't really care that much.
You got it. Yeah.
It's just I'm so exhausted most of the time. I mean not only am I filming myself while I'm traveling, but I'm filming myself while I'm traveling without ever using motors. So it's like I have little energy left at the end of the day.
That's what's so impressive to me. I know you have a little bit of downtime while you're in Tobago. I would highly recommend a couple documentaries by Lynn Weldon. He did the first documentary on the Appalachian Trail called 5 Million Steps. And that was him highlighting, this is done back in the 1980s, so it's kind of got the vintage feel at this point, but highlighting a different person for each state. My favorite of his came out a few years ago. It's called Overexposed. and he did the Continental Divide Trail, which I think is 2,700 miles through the Rocky Mountains from the Mexico to the Canadian border. And that was just him. And he was doing just that of, setting up a camera and then filming himself walking, into the horizon and, him making campfires at night. So it's a very chill, peaceful, it's got a nice cinematic quality to it. But I think you would respect the hustle of, what he had to do, hiking for 7 or 8 months. So definitely worth it.
Yeah, cool. I'll check that out.
Much respect to you for filming while traveling across the world without any motors.
Yeah.
So we're in the Seychelles.
The Seychelles, yes. And my girlfriend joined me. She'd never been on a boat before.
Oh wow. Okay.
And we sailed together to Tanzania.
Wow.
1,000-mile sail. About 10 days. She was seasick the whole time.
Oh God.
Yeah. We sailed through Tanzania, down through the Mozambique Channel to South Africa. Another couple weeks of sailing where she was seasick the whole time.
Oh God.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the boat life just was not working out for her. She was willing to suffer and continue on, but I was just like, I don't think it makes sense. I mean,
She must have really liked you.
Yeah, I really liked her. But,
the seas didn't agree.
and I mean, I guess, in the end, I was very committed to this trip, and it was more dangerous, to be honest, to have her on board. I think when I'm so comfortable out there on a small boat, I feel quite okay, but to bring somebody else out there, I have to be completely responsible for them. And even just bringing somebody who's not really capable at sailing the boat, I felt was sort of irresponsible of me in a way. I mean, she wouldn't agree with that necessarily, but in reality, that's sort of the case. Like it's one thing to go sailing on a well-go seaworthy boat, but to go out on this little boat that things can turn and extremely dangerous very fast on. It's a lot more stress to have to think about somebody else. I mean, if I get injured or lost overseas, she had no capabilities of sailing the boat.
Right. Okay.
Wow. And she wasn't that keen on learning either, which made it a little bit tougher.
Yeah. You need a first mate.
Yeah. Or no mate.
Right.
I feel again, I feel more comfortable solo. If you're going to have a first mate, that first mate has to be, of equal or better,
right,
at sea than you are, or it's becomes more of a liability.
Of course, yeah.
So I sailed solo South Africa. It was a 1,800-mile sail. We rounded the Cape of Good Hope first with. She rounded the Cape with me and a random German guy I met in the surf.
Wow.
And then, I sailed solo. That was earlier this year in April. Yeah, I think April.
Okay.
Sailed solo. It was a 1,700-mile sail to this St. Helena.
Okay. And that's a very, very remote island, correct? One of the more remote on the planet.
Yeah. So there's sort of a chain, not much of a chain. There's Ascension, which is mostly just it's actually the Space Force base now, I think.
Okay. Wow.
But that's a few hundred miles north of St. Helena, and then there's Tristan da Cunha further south.
Yes.
They're quite far distances, but yeah, St. Helena is very bizarre and spectacular place. Absolutely beautiful.
How is it bizarre?
Oh, just the landscape. It's got a bit of everything. It sort of feels a bit prehistoric, dramatic cliffs, but then giant fern forests.
Oh, wow.
And it's one of the most eroded islands on the planet. So very interesting history. The Portuguese discovered it first, as far as we know. There's nobody living on it.
Oh, wow.
And they kept it secret from the rest of the world for almost 100 years, I think, because it was such a valuable sort of naval stop off on the way back from India or whatever. And then it switched hands, French, English, and now there's a very interesting island population, very multicultural, but they have an almost English Caribbean accent, I would describe it. Okay. They speak sort of a patois, very friendly folks, but very, they've been living remote for a long time. Thank you.
At the edge of the world, basically.
Yeah, it just recently they got an airport, and very controversial airport, but before that it was a ship would come in every once a month type of thing, bring in supplies. And
oh my God, that's a strange existence.
Yeah. But beautiful. I did a hike with a buddy of mine. We did they have these hikes, they call them post box walks, where you go and you get a stamp from a post box. And there's 21 of them all around the island, and so we went and did every single one of them in nonstop in 9 days. Absolutely just beautiful. And then sailed solo from there to Brazil, another similar 18-day sail, similar distance. And then up the coast of Brazil, sort of stopped a few spots, did some more surfing, thankfully.
We're in 2022 right now.
Yeah, and I was in Trinidad and basically got here. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so what's the next step? What takes you from Tobago to the Appalachian Trail? And where are you going?
So I was only going to spend the month of October here on Tobago, wait out the hurricane season.
Right.
But then I realized I don't really have to take it slow going through the Caribbean islands, and nor do I have necessarily the budget to take it slow going through the Caribbean islands, because it gets quite a bit expensive on some of the islands.
Yeah. Right.
And living on the small boat is something I have no interest in doing. It's very uncomfortable. I don't really fit in the boat. I have to be on my knees when I'm cooking in the kitchen.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So it's small inside. I mean, the dreamy idea of living on a sailboat in the Caribbean is not really there for me.
Not when it's a 29-foot boat. Yeah. If you had a 40-footer,
27.
Right. Forgive me. Those 2 feet, that's a big difference.
It is. When it comes to sailboats, it is. It really is. But yeah, so I found actually a sweet little spot here. It's the Adventure Farm and Nature Reserve, and I've been helping them out build some ponds and some paths in exchange for my stay here. And
all right, it's a little work stay situation.
It's been really comfortable, and made the idea of getting back and spending more time on the boat less appealing. So I'm just sort of delaying that process, and soon, when the wind sort of switches to the east, I'll sail up through the Caribbean islands to the south of Florida.
Okay.
And I've attempted to sell the boat a little bit, just put it on Craigslist, but it's no real bite. So I'm going to likely donate it to a sailing organization.
Oh, great. Okay.
Which I've lined up there in Florida. And then I am looking at a mode of transportation to get me from there, where I donate the boat, sort of the mid-east coast of Florida. From there up to the trailhead in northern Georgia for the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, there's the Florida Trail, which is pretty flat, and then I think there's another trail in Georgia, Pinati, I believe it is. People have done it before, have gone essentially from tip of Florida all the way up to Maine, doing that. They don't connect.
Walking.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to look that up for you and see if I can find some travel logs on that. But it's doable. There is a newer trail that goes to Amacola State Park, which is the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. and that goes almost to the Florida-Georgia line, and then they're hooking up with the Florida Trail.
Okay.
Let me ask you this: why? So you're saying mid-coast Florida? I mean, we're looking, I don't know, Vero Beach, let's say, for instance. Why not get closer up north? Why not go up to Jacksonville or even through the Gulf of Mexico, up to Pensacola, for instance?
I looked. I basically was just searching for places I could donate the boat, and
there you go. Well, yeah.
They're the only ones who really got back to me. So
wow.
I even looked at possibility of donating to a spot up in Boston, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, partly just because, again, I don't really want to spend that much time on the boat, and I like the idea of walking.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But I'm sort of open to sailing it anywhere if somebody wants to buy it or if somebody will accept it as a donation.
So, how is it? I mean, that's the absolute freedom for me, is being able to go wherever you want to go. And it's just like, all right, they're going to buy the boat here. I'll go here, and that's it. I mean, has that been too freeing in some instances, or is that exactly what you've been looking for?
Yeah, no, that's the way I really enjoy traveling. Is just sort of being very present and just going with the flow, and going where the path takes me.
Yeah, I mean,
it's I started traveling when I was 20 years old, and my first trip I went backpacking down in South America.
Okay.
And that was the thing that really stuck with me the most, that I loved the most about traveling, was being able to wake up in the morning and, based on how I feel and what I feel like doing that day, go and do it, and just be able to live without any time, being able to be very present and sort of make decisions based on your instinct as opposed to what the world is telling you to do or what society is telling you
need
to do.
Visit and
just being free to go with the flow and be very present. I appreciate that very much about traveling, and I think it's funny because that's part of what was part of the reason why I love traveling. One of the reasons why I started this trip, among others, but I realized that if I was more successful and I had found more funding and maybe sponsorship, I might have lost that aspect.
Right, because you would have been forced to hit the highlights or get, content and
go here, do this at this time. You need to do this. You need to be there because we've organized this or this and that, or, thankfully that has not been the case.
So where are you? It looks like, so you're hitting the AT. You're going up from Georgia to the Hudson River. It looks like you've plotted a course up through Nova Scotia, possibly into Newfoundland, or no.
No, I don't know if maybe my map showed that at one point.
I think, I mean, that's just...
Well, actually, I don't think so. No, my map actually showed me going over to Europe originally.
I did see that. Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
It's obviously, it was just a squiggle on the map when I started. It was rough. There was two places that I really wanted to go when I started the trip that I knew I wanted to go apart. And that was the Himalayas.
Okay.
And Estonia.
Wow. Okay.
Because my dad is from Estonia.
Oh, wow.
My roots have never been there. I've never been anywhere in Europe, actually. I've been to England, where my mom is from, but I really wanted to go to Estonia. And unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. I'm okay with that. I've let that go. But yeah, so the Appalachian Trail, the plan is to take it up to the Hudson River, actually. Right. And paddle. I want to get a touring stand-up paddleboard. I don't have one yet. If anybody there or any of your listeners have a connection with a stand-up paddleboard.
Paddleboard, okay.
I want a nice long touring one to take up the Hudson and then into the Erie Canal to Lake Ontario and to Toronto.
All right, that's what makes sense. That's what I was thinking that you were going to be doing. Okay. Yeah, up the Hudson. I mean, the Hudson is really interesting. I mean, you can go whitewater rafting on the northern stretches of the Hudson River, which a lot of people don't realize. And it starts as a puddle from Mount Marcy, which is the highest point in New York State, which It's where I'm originally from. And then, of course, it, heads all the way down to Manhattan, and it's, 2 miles wide. So Hudson is a beautiful river, particularly in the northern stretches.
Yeah, I've heard that. So I haven't actually been able to find out great information on what it's going to be like to paddle up it. I know that it's tidal for quite a ways up, which should play in my favor, tidally. But I don't know how hard of a paddle it's going to be. Doing it in June and getting to Albany, basically, I'm curious about the strength of it. Just sort of asking around now.
My sense is by that point, June, I would say in the summertime, it starts, the water levels will go down just because of, March, April, May can be, pretty good rapids in the northern stretches. And that's just really the snow melt. By June, my sense is that it'll be pretty docile. Particularly the section that you'll be doing up through Albany. And then where does the canal meet the Hudson River?
So it's the Mohawk River turns into the canal, I think, sort of.
All right.
Combines, yeah.
So here we are in December. We're recording this December 11th. So when are you finishing? What's the next 6 months look like for you?
So yeah, plan is to get that all done and be back in Toronto in July, first week of July.
First week of July. So you start on July 13th, right? You were saying?
Yeah. Happens to be my birthday.
Okay.
But I don't plan to finish it on that day. Okay. I'd like to have 2 celebrations.
Fair enough.
It's like having your birthday on Christmas.
Yeah, really.
I don't want to do that.
December 22nd, right?
But yeah, somewhat close to that day, just because it makes sense for timing to arrive in Toronto and organize some other things. But yeah.
So now that you're 6-7 months out, are you looking forward to the end, or are you thinking maybe I should go to Nova Scotia and maybe make a little bit more of a loop there? What are your thoughts on that?
I did contemplate those ideas. Doing it with the boat, I think I've leaned away from that just because, again, the boat, it requires a lot of work that I don't want to put into it. And it's also just not really the greatest boat to do that with.
Right.
I still, like, there's this tiny part of me that wants to just sail over to Europe.
Okay.
But I don't know. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to get back home. I don't think in the future too often. Okay. But when I do, like in this moment, if I'm thinking about what it's going to feel like to get back and what, I feel really quite comfortable and I guess a bit excited.
Yeah.
I also am like mentally preparing myself for the amount of like overwhelming emotions that are going to bubble up.
Yeah.
It's like you can picture how it feels to like see your sister for the first time in 8 years.
Yeah.
But put that on top of seeing like all of your friends and family for the first time in 8 years.
Right.
Like, it's going to be intense.
Yeah. I would also be thinking like being done with the journey. It's, all you've known for 8+ years when you're done. That to me would be more intense than, obviously seeing people, but having completed the journey. And, I know people have through hiked the AT after 6 months, and there's that longing, how do you, 8 years, that's intensified,
Well, yeah. And you can't forget the 7 years that I had it in my mind that I wanted to do it. Like the dream, it's bubbling for 7 years. So it's like 15 years of my life, really.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm okay with that. I think I don't think that's going to be, I do have trouble picturing using motors again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not convinced that I ever will.
Okay.
Like the journey may be over, but I may continue with this way of life because I do really like it.
Yeah.
But that said, I don't want to live in Toronto, and I want to live on the opposite side of the country, which is a long journey away.
Right. Are you willing to do it? Reprise of your bike pogo stick.
Yeah, I think I will let go of the non-motorized thing. I do think I will. I mean, most of my life will still be non-motorized. Like I've never actually owned a car in my life.
Wow.
I've driven cars, and I drove a big truck when I was fighting fires and stuff, but I've never actually owned a car, and I'm really comfortable doing that.
Good for you.
I have had this dream that I would finish the trip and Tesla would sponsor me an electric car, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I suspect I will slowly get back into it. I don't know though. I'm not sure.
How has it changed your outlook on life? And, you know, you had talked about the environmental social justice aspect of it, and, you know, seeing climate change and meeting people in all walks of life in different countries. How has it changed you? How has it changed your perspective?
That's really hard for me to sum up. I think it's hard at this point to even really put it all in perspective, how much I've changed. I mean, I think it happens generally with a lot of people as they age and get older, they come to accept things a bit more. Yeah. I think for me, on this journey, I even went a step further with acceptance, in that I did 2 10-day silent meditation retreats.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They're called Vipassana meditation. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
But it's a serious practice in acceptance.
Okay.
And that was probably the most powerful thing and changing thing arguably of my life, but especially of this trip.
Wow. Okay.
In that I was able to accept absolutely everything in my life. I mean, I've always sort of accepted my own death. I think that's partly because of the way my life experiences growing up, losing my mom at a young age and then losing my dad, but also just, the way I dealt with my mom's death as a teenager and adult, I sort of came to accept my own death quite comfortably. Yeah. And I think that's also one of the things that's enabled me to do this trip, is just my acceptance of death and then that risk.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But I, obviously still have fears and stresses and anxieties, but letting that go with the Vipassana meditation was sort of took it to a next level, in the sense that I know I can survive quite happily with absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And I have really no fear of future financial security, or, what happens if I don't do this or I do that. I'm just very accepting. But when it comes to the world on a greater scale and a greater picture, Asia was very depressing.
Really?
I'd say living in the beautiful green bubble that I do over on the west coast of Canada, I think, you hear of what's going on in other places of the world, but really living and breathing and indulging in Asia was quite overwhelming and sad, I'd say. And knowing that it's not stopping or changing, it's just getting worse, and seeing, the people there are so lovely, and I love pretty much every country. Well, every country I've been to, I mean, the people are always what makes the place so special and wonderful and welcoming. but it's also so sad to see that they've become so comfortable living in polluted world, and that it's
right.
And on the other side of that, there's just that greed that's continuing to make it worse.
Yeah.
So that was tough, I'd say, Asia. And I don't know. I think I've always sort of been saying since the beginning of the trip, I'd say that the things that, a lot of my friends and a lot of people, I think, have given up at this point. They think, what you do is not really going to make a difference. The world is coming to an end, or you're going to explode, blah, blah, blah. And I've always sort of pointed out that the same things that we can do to, survive what may be coming are those things that can help prevent, that environmental collapse or ecological disaster, ecological collapse, I guess. I don't know if you want to call it that. Just becoming more independent.
Yeah.
Not relying on the system that feeds you and provides you with everything. Just simple things like growing your own food.
Right.
I think it's one of the most rewarding things we can do. That's like a priority of mine when I get back home, is to grow your own food. I mean, and just I don't know. I don't really stress out about the future. I'm not concerned about what's going to come, because I know that I don't think we know. I think the future can go in many different ways, and climate aside, I think what we're doing to the environment is stupid. Across the board. I mean, we clearly we need a healthy environment to be a healthy species, and we are not doing a good job of that. So I don't know. I don't know that my outlook on the world has changed that much. I'm just I'm just looking forward to growing food.
Yeah, there you go. It sounds like Vancouver Island is probably one of the more perfect climates on the planet to get the right amount of rain, soil, and.
Well, it's actually, I live in a temperate rainforest, so it's actually quite acidic soil and sort of hard to grow food.
Really? Okay. Wow, I didn't realize that.
There are great places quite close to where I am, but I'm right on the coast, and so it's, for one, it's salty, but it's also just gets way too much rain and not enough sun.
Really? Wow.
But salty. There's microclimates.
Yeah.
So if you happen to have a clear cut, then you may have much more luck. But
and how do you mean?
You go 100 miles inland into the interior of the island, and some of the best agricultural land in the province. Sure. But
how do you mean by acidic? I mean, is it a lot of pine forest there, or what's?
Oh, it's just because there's so much rain.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't quite understand how the soil acidity works, but like the pH of the soil, I think you really have to provide it with some fertilizer, or it's not the best soil for growing.
Right.
I mean, you can use seaweed, and there's all sorts of alternative ways to keep it fresh, but the soil itself is not necessarily the best for untouched. It's not the best for growing veggies.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I do want to dedicate some time. Ideally, start up a big greenhouse also.
Great. And then you'll be working on the book and the movie, and how that'll keep you busy for a while, I'm sure. So
yeah. And then I think to satisfy my desire to go to Estonia in Europe, once I get the book and film done, I'll go and do a tour over there.
Yeah.
A little speaking tour and promo tour.
All right, so you've got a speaking tour lined up, and cool. It sounds like
I wouldn't say it's lined up, but yeah, I'll definitely. That's just comes with the game. I'll be doing that.
Good.
And having fun with it. And by that time, I'll have summed up my thoughts and experiences a bit better.
Excellent. So how many kilometers have you traveled so far?
I haven't calculated it recently too accurately, but it's I think it's close to 50,000 miles.
50,000 miles. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's a fair number to say now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when do you expect it in Florida?
In Florida in late January, early February.
All right, late January, perfect time. That's the height of the season then. So it's the prime place to be. And most folks start the AT March 1st to somewhere around April into May. So you'll be so you have
how much snow is there going to be in March on the south of the trail?
There'll be enough. I mean, it depends on where, it depends on the year. In the Smokies, you've got to be careful because that's at 6,000 feet. So, you can get hit with a snowstorm up until May. I did a section of the trail in April, and it was cold for the first 4 days. It was very cold, hypothermic weather. And then the next day I got sunburned and it went into the 70s and there were no trees, there were no leaves on the trees and I just got sunburned. So you'll see a mixture of it. I guess my question to you is, it doesn't sound like you've done a whole lot of hiking. You said you've really wanted to do it in these 50,000 miles, but it's been a lot at sea and by bike. And you've really been traveling solo. And as you probably know, the Appalachian Trail has become a very social hiking expedition would be the wrong word at this point. A hiking journey. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think you'll stick to yourself? How do you think you'll like it? It'll be different.
Well, I mean, as I am getting closer to home, I think I'll have a few people joining me at the time.
Good.
I don't think for long periods because I'm probably going to be fast.
Good. Yeah.
I got long legs and I'm going, ultra lightweight or very lightweight.
Good.
Which is another thing I think why I don't think I'll necessarily be too social on the trail because people won't walk at my pace.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll find somebody who does. And by all means, I'm totally open to that. But I think it might be unlikely. I tend to move pretty fast when I do move.
Good. I mean, I'm glad you're going ultra light. It took me 25 years. And I have seen the evolution. My pack at one point was 60 pounds, now it's down to 20 with food and water. So, you said you'd had some knee issues over the years. So that's the worst thing for it is to carry too much weight on your back going.
Yeah. So. Well, my knees are actually completely fine now. I'm actually a bit more concerned about some sciatica that came about this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
Which is another reason why I'm more okay with finishing the trip because I'm getting old. I turned 40 this year.
40. Well, I'm 44, so I got a few years on you. So you look good, and you know what? You exude happiness and contentment. So that's the key thing. So
I have been in a very happy place recently. I've been surfing a lot.
Okay,
great wave here, and again, that's definitely my happy place. But excellent. The body, thankfully I've had time. Again, living on the boat, it's just not good for the body. So I've had time here to spend more time stretching, doing some yoga.
Yeah. The 6'3" frame on a cramped boat is not easy.
Yeah. But the ultralight thing, I mean, it's definitely the way to go. Absolutely. Yeah.
I learned that lesson the hard way. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I don't know, maybe I'll catch you on the Hudson River. It's an hour from me. So
perfect. That would be great.
So how can people find out more about you, support you?
Yeah. So everything you can find me at Roots of Change or Routes of Change, depending on how you pronounce it. I guess most Americans are Routes of Change.
I say roots. I think they're kind of interchangeable.
Okay. So anyways, ROUTES of change.
Right.
.org or social media at Roots of Change.
Okay.
Excellent.
Pretty
easy to find.
All right. Well, we'll be looking forward to welcoming you to the States in just a few months, and best of luck finishing up your journey. And we're looking forward to watching the movie, reading the book, and I guess seeing you in person in Tallinn, Estonia, or wherever that may be, wherever you're listening across the world. So
yeah, man. Well, I got to be honest. I have been half joking but half serious about this next section in Florida and the States to be one of the more interesting, but also one of the more dangerous parts of the journey. I don't want to end up in another Florida man story.
Just just don't go swimming is the key thing in Florida. So there are a lot of alligators. So
okay,
that would probably be your biggest concern in Florida, is just not deciding to go skinny dipping in a random pond somewhere.
Okay.
So, other than that, I think you'll be just fine. But
okay.
But generally it's not the animals you're afraid of; it's the humans.
Yeah, a lot of guns, right? A lot of guns.
But
I like the thought of the trail, though. I'd looked briefly at trails, but I didn't realize there was trails in Florida and Georgia.
Yeah, there is the Florida Trail that goes the length of the state of Florida, and then I believe it's the Pinhoti Trail that goes the length of Georgia, and I believe that terminates, or at least goes through Amicola State Falls Park. And,
I don't know if I'll have time now to do all that, but I'll consider it.
Yeah, you got options, one day at a time, right?
Yeah.
All right, Marcus, really appreciate it, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's been great.
All right.